plenty of seats down front. Are you ready, Christian?
Ready, and people are joining.
Okay, fantastic. All right, we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody, to the 2023 UNC Water and Health Conference. It's great to see you. It's Wednesday. Can you believe it? We made it. Some of us. If you are joining us for the first time today, raise your hand. A few. Hi, Jenna. Jenna's here. Jenna Davis, everyone. Yay. So just a quick update. We have over 1,800 folks joining us online, registered for the online program. So everybody, give them a wave. Here's the camera. Welcome them. They're from over 100 countries from around the world joining us and tuning in each day. So welcome to you folks. And we are translating into French and Spanish. And so we all would like to also thank our translators, and I encourage you to also tune in daily to the virtual program that's being hosted by Jan Willem Rosenboom, who's seated here in the front row. He starts the program every day at 7:45, and he gives a broad overview of the day and goes through some highlights of some of the sessions and does a recap on the previous day. And so please join us for that if you're up by that time or at the conference center. And then today we will also have the virtual networking session online from 12:30 to 1. And today I believe it will be Aaron Salzberg and Clarissa Brocklehurst who will be leading that conversation. So join us for that. And then again, you will need to refer to your hard copy program that looks like this and put your name on the back of it so that you don't lose it, or if you do, you can pick it up from the Water Institute table. And again, if you've got questions, please feel free to stop any of the staff with a yellow ribbon or any of the Friday Center staff and get an answer to your question. Yesterday, we supplied an unreasonable amount of acetaminophen and Tylenol to folks, so I'm not sure what that tells us about what's going on. But there are still some spots for the field trip to Owassa on Friday, and so if you would like to join us for a field trip, make sure you sign up, and that list is on the information board at the entrance of the lobby. And then again, please, we are a full conference, and so I'm just asking you to respect everybody's space and take some precautions and make sure I found a credit card yesterday and hotel room keys, and so just make sure you're picking up after yourself and taking care of your stuff. We have masks available, so if you would like to wear a mask, you're welcome to, and they're available at the Water Institute table. Hand sanitizer stations are located all around the premises, and we do encourage you to wash your hands every day, before meals, preferably. There's overflow seating also in Dogwood, so for those folks who don't make it into the Grumman Auditorium, please go to Dogwood. But if you do have questions at the end of the plenary session, make sure you come into this auditorium, and we have 2 mics located on either side of the auditorium. So when you get the cue, come over and line up behind the microphones to ask your questions. And again, join us on Twitter or X or however you would like to join us, and stay engaged that way. And I would now like to introduce Dr. Janet Davis, who's the editor-in-chief of PLOS, and she will come up and make an announcement.
Thank you very much for the promotion, because I'm not the editor-in-chief of PLOS, which is a very large organization, but I am one of the 2 editors-in-chief of PLOS Water. How many people here know that acronym PLOS? Who knows what it stands for? Are you kidding me? This is not a very good pass rate. Awesome. Public Library of Science. Public Library of Science. That's really important because PLOS was founded with the mission of reducing barriers to sharing high-quality research and to accessing high-quality research. So not just a pioneer in open science, in my view, the pioneer in open science. So as you see more and more journals moving into the open science, open access space, I want you to realize that you can connect those dots right back to PLOS. And I'm really excited to announce that we're working with Kata and Aaron and the whole team here at UNC to put together a special collection of research that will be presented at the conference this year. So we're really thrilled. And it's not just PLOS Water, but also our partner PLOS Journal, PLOS Sustainability and Transformation, or PLOS S&T. So any of you who have had any connection with either of those journals, you're on our editorial boards, you've published with us, you've reviewed for us, can we see some hands? I love you. Thank you. And the next time I come back, I want to see many more hands, right? So even if you are not presenting research this year, at least speaking for PLOS Water, we really would like to get you more involved with the journal. We'd love for you to submit your work to us. We would love for you to accept reviewer invitations for us. Really love that. And if you're interested in participating in the editorial board, I'd love to hear from you as well. I want to say too, I sort of jumped ahead of myself. I am an EIC at PLOS Water. I'm also a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill. Do we have others here? Yay, fellow alumni, yay. Okay. And have been coming to this conference for a long time. And Jan just gave me the perfect quote that this conference is large enough to be interesting and small enough to be intimate. And I just want to pause and acknowledge Kata, Aaron, much love to the team here because this is a really amazing community. So we are looking forward to working together on this special collection. I now have to say the things I'm required to say. Sorry. So, if you're interested in having your work be part of the collection, the submission deadline is going to be the 31st of December. So if you're like me and you present work at a conference, it's almost there, but not quite there. You still have time, right, to get that feedback and submit by the 31st. We can't guarantee acceptance of anything that's submitted. Research papers will go through the normal review process with the journal. If you're interested in submitting something else, like an opinion piece or a narrative review, you can get in touch with me or with the editorial team of S&T if you would like to submit there. When you do submit, please somewhere in your cover letter or in the tick boxes make it known that you are targeting this collection because it's going into a really big editorial system that, and we wouldn't want it to get lost. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say except I have these adorable little buttons, and so as a way to incentivize you to come say hi to me at this conference, if you come say hi to me, I will give you your very own PLOS Water button, collector's item. So thank you again. Have a good conference.
Thank you, Jenna, and we're very excited about the partnership. And so it is now my pleasure to introduce to you the next plenary today, which is the 2023 UN Water Conference Supporting Commitments with Evidence. And so our moderator for this particular panel is Eric Momanyi from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's a senior program officer there, and he has agreed to be the moderator for today's panel. So welcome, Eric.
So hello and good morning, everyone in the auditorium here today. I know there are many others who are watching online in the virtual link. I want to welcome you to day 3 of this plenary, which we're going to be tackling the issue of how we can generate the evidence required to support the government commitments at the country level. In 1977, 46 years ago, the United Nations Water Conference was held in Mar del Plata in Argentina. During this conference, it set the goal of providing clean water and adequate sanitation to everyone by the year 1990. I don't want to tell you what happened after that. The world has waited 46 years to hold another UN Water Conference. In the period between 1977 and the year 2023, a lot has changed. A lot has changed. In 1977, the Apple II was released. Now, for those of you who are struggling, wondering what the Apple II is, please use your Google search. In 2023, we agree that we live in the age of AI, and with some thinkers already speculating that we have moved at the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution. In 1977, the world population was a total of 4.2 billion people, 38% of who lived in urban cities, 1.6 billion. In the year 2023, we have 4.5 billion people who are living in urban areas. That is approximately 55% of the world's population. That is actually double that was in 1977. Today, climate change is turning our world upside down. It is severely limiting our ability to produce food. It is flooding our cities. It is drying our farmlands. And in the words of the UN Water Conference organizers, it's either we have too much water, too little water, or too dirty water. And so many people agree that water, sanitation, and hygiene are inextricably linked to the fortunes of nations. With the threat of climate change and its threat to the world's economic systems, there has been thinking that the UN Water Conference was that watershed moment when governments will be able to seize the moment and declare bold next steps that will safeguard our water resources, provide access to safe water and sanitation. The conference resulted in a total of approximately 800 commitments by governments. And I want to thank the UNC Water Institute team for really getting to unpack these commitments this morning. The presentation will be providing insights into the level of ambition that is contained in the commitments that were released at the UN Water Conference. And the question that I'm really looking to ask is, have these commitments met the urgency of the moment that we live in right now, 46 years later? As a research community, we have an important role to play in providing the evidence that will enable this sector to rise to this moment. And many of us are doing amazing, relevant work, and I want to congratulate all of you for this. But it's clear that to avoid the vision of 1990, going the way of 1990, we must be willing to sit down and ask the question, are we generating our evidence in the most impactful way possible? And so our plenary this morning will explore the role that we must play in enabling governments and other key decision makers to boldly and decisively face the challenges of the day in the water and sanitation sector, to be able to see the opportunities that exist, and because there are many opportunities, and to develop the practical business models that will be able to scale these solutions. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this morning I want to welcome Clarissa Brocklehurst for a keynote presentation. Clarissa is an adjunct professor at the UNC Water Institute. Please welcome her. Put your hands together for Clarissa.
Thanks very much, Eric, and hello to everybody. It's great that I have a chance to take just a few minutes to set the scene for the panel discussion that Eric is going to moderate. So, as Eric has explained, in March of this year, there was the first water conference held at the UN in 50 years. And as he explained, it was intended to mobilize UN member states and the UN system to take action on water. Here's some of the stats on the conference. I'm not sure how many people who are here today. Did anybody here go to the conference? How many of you were there? Yes, okay, so you know what it was like. It was crazy, it was huge. It was so big that in fact many people who came to the conference never actually even got inside the UN compound to be able to go to any of the sessions. There were interactive dialogues, there were major plenary sessions, and one of the most important things that came out of the conference was that over 800 commitments were made as contributions to what was called the Water Action Agenda. And these are all online. They were submitted through an online process, and they are available online. And if anybody's curious, you can go and scroll through all of the commitments and read all of the commitments. They're very text-heavy, I will warn you. These commitments were supposed to be game changers that would catalyze change. And so what we wanted to do today is just tell you a bit about what we think we can learn from these commitments through an analysis that has been made of a database that the Water Institute obtained of 764 of the commitments. That was the number that had been made at the time that the conference started. There were commitments added after that, but the database that the Water Institute has comprises about 91% of all the commitments that were made. And we have a very brave and committed group of students who have been trolling through these commitments and working very hard to come up with some analysis. So I wanted to share a little bit of that with you right now. So first, who made the commitments? And I think you'll see here that there's a bit of a surprise, which is that in actual fact, only about a quarter of them were actually made by UN member states. There was a huge number of commitments made by NGOs and also by the UN system itself, which was expected, some by academic institutions, some by the private sector. But in actual fact, only 55 member states made commitments out of the almost 200 member states. So that's only about a quarter of member states actually bothered to make commitments. So there was something that was holding back 3/4 of UN member states from making these commitments. So here's some of the analysis that the Water Institute has been able to make. What we wanted to do is we wanted to drill down on a subset of these commitments. To start out with, we wanted to look at the 187 commitments made by member states, made by governments. But those commitments came in, there were two types of commitment. One was the type of commitment made by a wealthy member state as a donor agency, so the United States or Sweden or the UK, making a commitment that had to do with the investments that they were planning to make in international assistance. And then there was the type of commitment that might be made by any government about something that they plan to do within their own borders, and we called these domestic commitments. So commitments made by a government in a country to be carried out in that country. And then, of course, because of the nature of the work we do, we were interested in those domestic commitments made by low and middle income countries. And as you can see, that was 73 out of the total 837 commitments. So already we're working with a subset of a subset of a subset. And because countries were able to make multiple commitments, in actual fact, this 73 commitments is dominated by just a handful of countries. So for instance, both Mexico and Peru made 11 commitments each. So 22 of the 73 commitments is made by those two countries. And in fact, about half of them were made by 5 countries. And again, only about a quarter of low and middle income countries actually made commitments. So there was clearly a barrier there to the commitment process. So what we wanted to do was look a bit at the quality of the commitments. So the team working on this overlaid onto the commitments they were reading through the SMART criteria. And of course, now all of you are racking your brains to remember what SMART stands for. So I'll tell you. It's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So when we looked at this, we found that quite a few of the commitments were time-bound, that whoever wrote the commitment had included a start date and an end date. But very few of them were actually aligned with an existing government policy. Very few of them had any kind of measurement criteria applied to it. And to have a combination of those criteria was very rare indeed. So unfortunately, many of the commitments were what we would say not particularly great quality. Not surprisingly, for a conference that had water only in its title, the commitments overwhelmingly were made for water. Far fewer were made for sanitation, and unfortunately a very small number mentions hygiene, and there was not a single hygiene-specific commitment in all of the commitments. But one of the things we wanted to look at was, what did countries want to do? Did they want to do infrastructure, bricks and mortar, holes in the ground? Or did they want to do what many of us would refer to as system strengthening? And specifically, we wanted to look at whether they wanted to work on policy, institutions, and regulation. And so this finding, I think, is one of the most interesting out of the analysis that has been done, which shows that overwhelmingly governments did want to do system strengthening. Many of them many of the commitments related to infrastructure, but far more of them related to either some combination of infrastructure and system strengthening or system strengthening alone. And we looked at specifically what they wanted to do. Many of these, what we called PIR commitments, related to new government policies, change government policies, expanding existing regulation, setting up new government institutions. And let me give you an example of a few of those types of things. Thailand committed to a new national data center. El Salvador committed to establishing a new water authority. Niger committed to a new regulatory agency. Benin committed to master planning for water. And Mozambique committed to expanding its regulatory activities. A bit of a surprise was that actually very few of the commitments made by low and middle income countries singled out vulnerable populations. It may be that if we look through those other commitments, the ones made by NGOs or made by donor governments, we would find more mention of this. But in actual fact, we were a bit surprised to find that this did not turn up in the low and middle income country commitments. So in conclusion, and I hasten to point out that we need to do a lot more analysis to be able to analyze the entire set of commitments and learn more about them. I mean, what we can see is that the commitment process at the UN Water Conference of this year clearly was seen as limited value to countries and to low and middle income countries. So why were there those barriers to making commitments? What held countries back? How could we do this better in the future? There were definite challenges to making high-quality commitments that met SMART criteria. Governments tended to neglect sanitation and hygiene, but it's clear that many of these countries making commitments wanted to improve policy, institutions, and regulation overwhelmingly, far more than just expanding the physical systems. So that raises the question, what can we do to help? What do we do as an international community of practitioners and researchers do to help those countries reach those aims? What kind of evidence base do they need us to provide so they can do it? I'll stop there, and thank you very much. I'll turn back over to...
So to help us discuss as part of this plenary today, we have a distinguished panel of experts who are going to help us this conversation. Please, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Barbara, Cecilia, Kwabena, Lisa, and Daniele to the stage. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks for willing to come and sit here and to be able to have this conversation with me and with the rest of this audience. Perhaps as a way of introduction, I don't want to go into the details of who they are because it's in the program. But I would just, for the sake of connecting with the audience right now, I would just want to give you a minute each to be able to introduce yourself. Just mention the institution you're affiliated with, and perhaps one reflection based on the presentation that we just had in 1 minute. Can we begin with you, Barbara?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So I'm Barbara Evans from the University of Leeds. I'm sorry, it's the second time I've sat on the stage. Too much Barbara. But I work at the University of Leeds. I've worked all of my life on one of the orphan topics, sanitation. So, the most depressing thing for me is that 46 years later, we can still say, we haven't really addressed sanitation very effectively. So I want to kind of raise that during the panel today and think about why that is the case.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Rudge. I work at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK. Essentially, it's development agency, on that side anyway for me. I think that the conference obviously was an important spotlight on some of these issues. We mustn't forget that. And it's really great to see the policies and institutions and regulation kind of made it up as a really important part. Of course, I too am really disappointed. I've been doing a lot of work on hand hygiene and making sure that that stays on the agenda, as well as kind of the inclusion piece. But I think it raises the question of how difficult it is for us to get ministries and sectors to work together and think about a bit more about what we can do to make that happen.
Thank you. And my name's Daniele Lantagne. I'm from Tufts University. I think thinking about the panels together, on Monday we heard what I'm calling about the 3 C's, the cholera, conflict, climate, the impacts that will happen. Yesterday we talked about working together across the humanitarian development nexus. It's really clear the world is changing under our feet. We need new ways of working. And I think UN Water, we had all this hope that we would come together and figure out new ways of working in water. And I think being there and seeing the amazing analysis that was done, that I don't feel like we got there. And I think we need these new ways of working, and we're not sure what to do moving forward into this world that's changed under our feet. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Cecilia Scharp, and I'm Director for Water Sanitation at UNICEF in New York. I also have a passion for groundwater and groundwater protection, where I have my very long past history at the university. So thank you, Clarissa and team, for making this analysis. And obviously, I think we all recognize that there could have been so much more into these commitments. We really had large hopes for them to be the ones that made transformational commitments to do things differently. And apparently it's not there, it's very visible. However, there are those countries that are making commitments, and I also recognize that they are looking at system strengthening, upstream work, which is really interesting. So just to say that there was when governments made those commitments, there were no process for follow-up. Now, since September, there was a resolution passed that there will be 2 more UN water conferences before 2030, namely one in 2026 and one in 2028. So there will be a push forward for member states to move on reaching the SDGs, and I'm sure this type of analysis can help them to be more smart when they do more new commitments. So we need to be there and help them, and also implement at country level, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning to you all. My name is Kwabena, Provost College of Engineering, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. And in the college, I have 11,000 students, engineering students, out of which 1,000 are postgraduate students. I have been working in the WASH area as a researcher for quite some time, and I also lecture, involved in some large-scale research projects like the rail water, which is currently ongoing, and I also used to be part of the WASH cost and others. My reflection on the analysis, thanks to the Water Institute team, is that it reflects the state of the sector, where we give a lot of attention to water, but sanitation and hygiene have been left behind. If I look at the analysis, it does confirm some of the wicked problems we have in the sector, basically in the area of governance, data policy, institutions, and regulations. Without addressing that, it will be difficult for us to fix the other ones, such as the technical challenges, the financial challenges, to take us to where we want to be. The other concern I have is that the commitments are not linked to any mechanism to demand accountability. For example, where I come from, not sure what the commitments for my country, where it is, and whether anyone is even looking at monitoring to see if it will lead to real change. So I'm happy to be here for us to discuss in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you, and you're welcome to this panel. It's clear that this analysis provides a very good baseline, so to speak. I mean, we would have wished that it was going to demonstrate progress, but therefore it sort of like provides a baseline from which we must work upwards from. And the number of commitments are few. And we all agree, and it's a bit disappointing in some instances, but I also think it's always useful to be very clear about the size of the challenge ahead of you than to try to imagine that it's much, much smaller than it actually is. So, Cecilia, just maybe to start with you, these commitments, few as they may be, many of them are focused on policy, institutions, and regulations. And I know that UNICEF is very interested in the system strengthening space. What kind of evidence, do we have the evidence required? And maybe perhaps before I come back to you, just to mention much quickly, that the focus of our conversation today will not necessarily be on the actual formal process of the UN commitment and how the follow-up would be. It's more like from the context of this community of researchers to say, how do we partner with the governments that need to make and scale up these commitments in ways that they have the evidence that would enable them to sort of like scale up what needs to happen. And so back to you, Cecilia, from a UNICEF perspective, do we have the evidence to support these ambitions around system strengthening and climate resilient wash within UNICEF and within the sector?
Okay, thank you, Eric, and thank you. I think system strengthening is something that probably has been mentioned quite many times during the conference already. But it is a sign of that we as a sector is moving. It's something that resonates to us as a sector because we already see that we need to shift our focus from only doing infrastructure pumps and pipes, but really trying to look at and understand what are the factors and the functions that needs to be in place in a government to ensure that they, in their own leadership, can provide sustainable services over time. And I think from my point of view, it's a response to something where we have been failing over time, namely to provide sustainable services. We have been working over time so much, but we also know that both behaviors and water systems are not lasting over time. So for me, this huge shift is really important. It's something that resonates to all of us, I think. And it really becomes a movement, and I'm happy to say I want everybody to join this movement because we really need to go down this road to ensure that we have services that are lasting over time. So now, we shouldn't have things on an iPad because they run away suddenly. So, so we have more partners engaging. And just to say that to make this substantial shift that we need to do, we need to have more partnerships. We need to work closer with governments in countries. And we need to recommit to aid effectiveness, to development effectiveness, namely aligning what we do, working more and more in coordination with governments and try to get away from this is my approach or this is how we do it. No, we need to work really together with government, under the leadership of government, to remove those bottlenecks and gaps that we see in the system. And just to recognize as well that punching a borehole is something you can do quickly. Shifting a system will take time and energy and effort from all of us. And we need to document, we need to learn, because we do not really know what an impactful policy looks like. So what is this we are going to do? And just to say, because this is my last point, I know I'm talking too much, but climate, well, we live in a world with multiple overlapping crises. Climate being one of the most impactful on our wash systems, obviously. We know that we cannot provide services if there is too much floods and droughts and et cetera, et cetera. And you mentioned it already in your speech, Eric. So we need to figure out, strengthening system, how do we do it to ensure that these systems still support risk-informed solutions that are also resilient to climate change. And there are so many questions that we need to have answered in how do we do this? Because we don't know. But importantly, we need to move quickly. Anyway, we cannot leave people behind who are impacted by climate impacts or severe weather events. So we learn by doing, but we all need you in the academia to bring us solutions that are resilient and the science behind it. Thank you.
Great. In a moment, we'll come back to the operationalization of how we get to do that. But I want to stick still on these water commitments. Barbara, clearly hygiene and sanitation are very sort of like low on the political agenda. What do we need to do differently as a research community to help governments to sort of like get this up higher, much more recognized?
Yeah, so, I mean, we could talk about this for 6 weeks, let's agree, but trying to think about it in 3 minutes. I was thinking of 3 things, and I think trying to pick up on some of Cecilia's points. I think the first thing that we have to do is to be very honest about, we sometimes talk about this as if water and sanitation, but particularly sanitation, are politically neutral. Sanitation is an act of profound political disruption. It takes, people who don't have sanitation are utterly disadvantaged in society. And if we're saying we're trying to achieve universal access to high quality sanitation, we're actually proposing a transformation in society. And I think as long as we as researchers don't face that, we sometimes live in a bit of a vacuum of sort of, oh, if only I could get the flushing mechanism to be more effective, or if only I could, I don't know, get my tariff structure to just work a little bit more efficiently. It's not about efficiency, it's about power and an enabling environment. So I think that's one thing we have to do, is to be honest about how. Now that takes me to my second point, which is that we then have to be honest that as researchers, we have to be willing to bring bad news. Because I think the challenge of working in partnership is that partnerships are not just, let's all just agree that everything that's happening right now is all fine and hunky-dory. We have to be willing to bring bad news. So we have to organize ourselves in ways where we can do that in the most constructive way possible. And again, I would say that's particularly true for sanitation, because we may be saying things like, here's a group of people who, in this area, people will never be able to live safely. And so you're getting into issues of housing, land rights. Those are all very profoundly, often you're the person coming through and say, I'm sorry, Minister, your policy is just not going to work. So we have to work out how to do that constructively. The third thing I want to say is that we have to also, and I think Cecilia also raised this point, we shouldn't forget an unfashionable part of our work, I think, as researchers is implementation science. We've got to be good at saying, how much do we know about if I do X, then Y happens? We've done quite a lot of impact research over the last 15 years. If I do X, what will be the big impact in economics or health? That's maybe important. But if we all agree that sanitation and water matter, a more interesting and difficult question for us is to say which policies, which funding mechanisms, which types of management structures, which types of implementation approaches actually give us sustained resilient outcomes. And that would be really the big area that I would encourage people to move into.
Excellent. So perhaps thinking about this, please, you can put your hands together and clap. That's okay. So I just want to come to you, Kwabena, and you obviously lead a large research. I'm not sure how many commitments did Ghana have in the UN Water Commitment, and I'm not putting you on the spot. This is yes.
I'll tell you. We'll do one-on-one on that.
Exactly. Yeah. But then, and again, this would not necessarily. I think the presentation was very clear that the number of countries, governments that made the commitments is very low. And I think there was a commitment problem. My question to you is this, that considering the current existing research partnerships that we have at the local level with government, what is your take about what needs to be able to change for governments, for us, in the words of Barbara, for us to be able to speak to the ministers about what's not happening in much more effectively in ways that they will actually listen to us?
Thank you. To begin with, I think we're not investing a lot in research and development, particularly the context-specific research that we need to address our solutions. First and foremost, where low middle-income countries, governments don't invest in research. And the NGOs are here, say they don't invest in research. The best is to fund a quick study, like a consultancy. So to address long-term solutions, it's not happening. As I said, I'm involved in some international research projects. Yes, I have been fortunate to be involved in a number of that, and that addresses more of the international research agenda. So in some cases, it will not address the local specific challenges that needs to be addressed. If we look at the commitment, it's highlighted the need to address the governance issues, the policy, institutions, regulations, and that requires local specific research. And remember, I think you did mention it as a political economy. you were explicit that that's for sanitation. It's the same for water. And it's a complex area that requires local solution, those who understand the local context, and it requires space and time flexibility to engage with the government and other stakeholders. Without that, we cannot solve what I call the wicked problems. And once we don't address that, the technical challenges, we have the solutions, but it's not going to work. I'm from a college of engineering. We have the technical solutions, the technologies. We know how to address non-revenue water on paper, but on the ground, we have to address the political economy. So the bottom line, we're not investing a lot in research, particularly in country. You talk to some NGOs, they say, ask for research. And in some cases, they fly in expatriates who come and go. They have solutions, and they're good as a projectized approach. It doesn't address our long-term problems. We need to embed the solutions in the country systems to make sure what we're doing will be sustainable.
Just to hold on to that point, my question is, do you or anybody in the panel have an example of what we think is going right? Because it's one thing to try, obviously in every context, there's certain things that need to shift. The question is there something that we feel is going right? And maybe if you're still thinking about it, I can go to the next question. Barbara, you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, I can't think of a specific example, but I want to put my hat, tip my hat to any organization that puts its data and information in the public domain. I think that is one thing that we should all be committing to do. We don't know what things cost, and we don't know what we get at the end of interventions. So occasionally I'm in presentations. I was in a presentation yesterday of somebody who had gone back after 5 years to see what had happened in a program after 5 years. Hat tip to anybody who does that kind of work and makes that information public, because at least then we have a little hope of knowing what's going on. That's the best I can come up with, sorry.
Okay, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think there has been some progress, but not as fast as we want. In terms of even the policies, we have a number of policies, we have some regulatory frameworks, but just following the policies to the letter, the enforcement, that is where you see some of the political economy issues coming up.
Great.
So we have, for example, in Ghana, we just finished the National Watch Development Plan 2021 to 2030. Fantastic document. We pray we'll be able to follow it. I remember in the past, we prepared the National Environmental Sanitation Action Plan, nice document, Sanitation Investment Plan, nice document. They've both expired. We couldn't connect the investment plan with the budgeting system, so nothing happened.
Great. So I want to come to you, Daniele. It looks like the world is looking for a silver bullet. Something that, if we can be able to figure out what that silver bullet, do we have a silver bullet around how we want to deal with these issues? Could that be RCTs perhaps?
Exactly. So I was asked to be spicy on this panel, and certainly asking me if RCTs are the answer is likely to get a fairly spicy answer. So what I would say is to come back to this thought of the world is changing under our feet. Kind of 2 decades ago, we talked about every year metrics were getting better, right? We were seeing improvement, things were being added on. We're talking about very siloed research. We have RCTs in the development context, 5 or 10-year RCTs that have the time frame to think about. 10 years is an okay time frame for an answer, right? We have a lot of implementation science research, huge successes there in the humanitarian context. If you ask about successes, I've seen huge implementation science successes, but mostly in cholera, mostly in emergency work where your time frame is so much shorter. We have some new entries. We have Gates coming in with a very technological perspective, like bring that in. We have behavior and hygiene and sanitation come in. But how I've seen that develop is very siloed. You have the tech people and the behavior people and the implementation science people and the RCT people and now maybe the AMR people. And I think it's all very, very siloed. And it's in other ways, it's also a little bit top down. And we do really have to question, is that how colonialist is some of that research, right? And we need to deconstruct some of that. And kind of moving forward into a world that we're living in right now with climate, conflict, and cholera and other diseases, I don't see a research type there's not one answer. There's never a silver bullet. But I see characteristics of research, and I've tried to write some of those down. So some of them that I think research questions come from the field, right? And you are working with people, and it's not, I have a research question, will you implement it? It's you actually are collaborating with local researchers, local governments to define those questions. There's training back and forth. I know how to do something in my lab. I teach you how to do that. You know what's happening in the local context, as Kwabena talks about, bring that back. And it's back and forth, it's as equals. It's timely. We don't have 10 years for cholera, right? And that brings back to Barbara's point about implementation research. It's incorporation into policy. What does this mean, and what does that mean for the policy document? As a success, my students and I worked on some cholera research. It is 10 peer-reviewed manuscripts, and we got it down to one sentence. If you spray chlorine on surfaces, make sure they're wetted. It doesn't matter how you spray or wipe. Just make sure the surface is wetted. That goes into policy documents and is readable, right? We need to get our research down to one sentence. What does it mean? How do you get it into policy? It needs to be transdisciplinary. We need to break down these silos. I'm not an expert in behavior or sanitation, but I need to work with Barbara, right? And I need to work with the people on the ground. And it needs to be flexible because we can't plan a 3-year time frame in a context where there's not going to be a cholera outbreak or a COVID outbreak, or a conflict right now is very scary, right? And I think that this is not impossible to do. We do have successes of this. It is not even impossible to do in an RCT, right? It is possible to do that, but it's harder. And I think, to come back to what Kwabena was saying about local context, if we start making our research about the local context, we will see commitments from governments. If you go to a government in Ghana, say, I want to do research in Ghana, I want to talk about this, I've worked with Ghana, people from Ghana, people will listen. If you go to Ghana and say, well, we did this RCT in Peru, that's not going to work, right? And so this comes back to system strengthening as individual systems. It may be government for places where the government isn't supporting the people. It may be the church network. It may be NGOs. But I think it comes away from impact and more toward rights and dignity and changing behavior, as Barbara said. And I think there is a lot going right. There is a lot building off of. I'm excited we're here on the stage talking about this. And I think there is a way forward.
Excellent. So, Lisa, please put your hands together. Lisa, you represent a development partner on this panel. And I'm just curious to know, from what you're hearing and from what you're listening, what kind of constituencies are you managing in the back burner within your own ecosystem? And do you have sort of like the enough? Do you have the kind of evidence to be able to sort of like keep them engaged in this conversation?
Yeah, thank you very much. So, yeah, perhaps from my point of view, obviously, we, as an advisor, often get asked, what is it that we should be doing to strengthen the systems, but also deliver those WASH services to people who need it most. That answer has been difficult, right? Because we have had this cycle of build and neglect. We have neglected the operation and maintenance, and what comes out are statistics when we look at sustainability studies that are pretty poor. So in the face of that, how do we convince our ministers and our senior decision makers on where to invest and how important it is to invest in those WASH services? So that is a massive challenge. And we've been discussing over the last few days, over the last possibly decade, around kind of how strengthening those WASH systems. It's come out in the commitments. The question is, how do we strengthen those? What part of the system do we need to strengthen in order to get the biggest impact? And I'm talking about it from my point of view, but I think as well in country, and we've spent a lot of time talking about what needs to happen as a local conversation and a national conversation, those same conversations are happening at that level. And we need to understand how we can support governments to justify that as well. And just you were asking about what positive examples were. So, you know, the triangle, the AIP pyramid, which identifies kind of where the funds are going to come from. Those are really important kind of conceptual models that help us advance the dialogue as well with member states, with governments, in terms of where that finance is going to come from. But really what we need as well from the academic community is to be able to document how that change occurs, and where there is success, to share that and then feed that back into policy. And just, of course, we have Barbara Evans who can tell truth to power in our country, so we're very lucky. But we need to make sure that we have that collaborative spirit across and including on international and global platforms as well as at the national level, and that they inform each other. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Put your hands together for them. As we get to the second set of questions, I want to encourage members of the audience, if you have questions that you want to start thinking about them. And then perhaps even those who are watching from the online audience, just think about that, and perhaps you can post them, I think, the appropriate places to do that. The team here will collect them. And then we will have a moment to be able to look at them. Cecilia, I want to come back to you. You know, UNICEF perhaps has one of the largest sort of like footprint among many organizations globally. And can you just share with us a little bit about how you are making those kind of like local partnerships with institutions of learning, higher learning, and research partnerships, just to be able to strengthen this sort of like research ecosystem globally?
It should be, the guy will put it on.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks for the other speakers. I think you have already started to talk about issues that is really close to my heart, and but also what I really believe is important in terms of strengthening national systems, research system. But just to say, so for UNICEF, first of all, we are an organization that uses a lot of evidence. Every programming we do should be based on science and evidence. But also, we are happy that we are able to generate new evidence, and that we are hosting, for instance, the JMP, which helps to provide data to all of you to do your work, and also that we are presently looking at, for instance, including more indicators to understand gender transformation in WASH. Climate resilient WASH, how do we measure, what do we do? And we all know that if we have measurements, if we collect data together, then things will also change. This is what triggers a lot of changes, because countries want to be seen as doing progress. So I think this is really strong tool, but it's also a ground for all collaboration with the scientific and academia. So just to say that this is to us a little bit of a pride, UNICEF, WHO, and this is how we engage with many of you, because in the end, when we develop new indicators, it's with academia and many of you. So overall, I mean, we need guidance and support by academia and scientists when we develop guidance, provide evidence, policy advice, etc. Of course, we do a lot of evaluations. We do randomized controls even, very few, but we do, because they take a lot of time. And we need many times, as you said, evidence and data coming in quicker to be able to take policy decisions. And of course, a lot is about working together in supporting governments in building capacity where there are gaps. So just to say that we have a very important way of working with think tanks, academia, and so on, which is building on a dual partnership, which I think is interesting. It's UNICEF and the partner organization share goals and bring financing to the same partnership. And this we have, for instance, we have done it with Tufts several years. We have Stockholm International Water Institute, IDS, IRC WASH, etc., who becomes deep partners over time, who helps us develop our thinking and work with us closely in partnership in governments, in countries, to help bring out capacity and do analytical pieces. So, but I think where we need to shift a little bit is with these partnerships to ensure that we engage more with local research capacity, local think tanks, and ensure that they lead more than we do. So we come and support, but national institutions should lead much more. And just to say the last piece of it, it's partnerships with governments, national research organizations, and think tanks, others, of course, who are in the sector, to help to have more local data, to inform local policy making, to forge these really important links between communities and local governments, to build trust, to ensure that services are delivered in a way that communities need them. And so this is for me really where we, and also to ensure that we have local adaptation, because climate impacts are local. So we need to have this access to data and science and evidence at local level for local policy making and forging these links between communities and local government. I think that's where a lot of the development will happen. Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned local leadership, and I think that resonates increasingly in every conversation. And Kwabena, you know, talking about as a local researcher, you know, and what does it take, what would it take for local researchers to take the kind of leadership required, to provide the leadership required in both within the global ecosystem of researchers, but at the same time in terms of relationship with governments? What needs to change to be able to get that connectivity and that ownership a lot more fundamental?
Yeah, thank you. I think for the local research institutions, we should create space for the stakeholders when we are implementing a research. We need to involve them in the research so that the research outcome, the research outputs will be owned and it can change the sector. So specifically, what I'll say is that the research itself will be meaningless if it is not linked to uptake and embedding in the country systems, so it can lead to improvement. I have been involved in some research that had ample space and time to engage the government, the local stakeholders, and you know they also have their business, their core business, so if you want to work with them, you have to be a bit patient and create a space. Once that is done, it takes a lot of time, but through that we'll be able to secure the ownership, they will commit to it, help provide data where necessary, validate, and the uptake will be quicker, faster, and it will be sustainable. So working with the local partners is that important. But what also needs to change is for some of the local researchers to be able to secure funding. I think R&D in countries is not given the necessary priority. I did mention that. So being able to secure international funding will really help. And again, linked to that, where I sit, as I said, I have only 10% postgraduate students. Our target is 25, but most of our graduates will find it much easier getting scholarships to fly to Europe or North America than staying in Ghana for their postgraduate studies. But if you look at the work sector in Ghana, most of those in key leadership were all trained locally with a postgraduate program. CWSA chief executive has his PhD from KNUST, and you can count a lot of them in the sector. So having a strong postgraduate program and being able to increase enrollment locally helps. But it becomes difficult at times to secure funding to attract students locally. It becomes much easier. For example, this year, just last month, I had 50 universities in US coming to KNUST to engage with students and recruit in Kumasi and Accra. Not more than 2 months ago, 50 universities came to Ghana to recruit, to have interviews, etc. We are not getting the support we need locally. I'm referring to government because the cost of training locally is much lower compared to elsewhere.
I think that's a smooth transition to Daniele. I mean, you sit in the US. Clearly, US universities and European universities are going to Ghana to be able to recruit students to come here. My question is, how is that ecosystem changing for you from your angle, and what needs to shift in terms of like those kind of relationships to make this impactful?
Yeah, I'll start and then come to that. So I think what needs to change in the West is I would like to see us in the WASH sector kind of blow up this medical research pyramid we have that RCTs are better than this, are better than this, and better than this, and come back to the most impactful research is the research that answers the local question to get people WASH services, right? And if that's a case study, I'm okay with that. And I would like to see an expansion of the research definition to be more based on what the local needs are and less a medical research pyramid. I think that the way that universities in the West need to start working is to understanding local data better, to do more training without being extractive, right? And that's the sense of like, there are times I go and I train in that, and then I don't have to go back then, right? It's like you're leaving, you're training government officials or students, or there is a benefit to training, but I was not aware of the extractive nature in Ghana, and that's really difficult. And so I think, and I also think it's more about translational research. If you've ever been to the Harvard University does the Ig Nobel Awards every year. They have Nobel Prize winners give out Ig Nobel Awards to the worst research papers every year. Things like in math, when you're running forward, why does the pigtail go side to side? That's a research paper. It won the Ig Nobels. They do this amazing thing of explain a concept research topic in 1 minute in plain language. The year I went, it was The Big Bang by a Nobel Prize winning Harvard professor. Say your research in 7 words. Say it in 30 seconds in plain language. We don't do enough research translation because that's what leads to policy. 5 bullet points. I remember working at CDC. You know, Secretary Clinton needs 5 bullet points, less than 25 words total on 1 PowerPoint slide on what we should do for WASH in X country, right? That's gonna be impactful. And it doesn't mean we don't also do the RCTs, but I think we've been in a place in the West that says RCTs are best, we should do them for all of WASH, it should be very extractive. And I think that's something that we need to understand where they're appropriate and where other things are appropriate, and how to support in-country researchers in their country. Bringing funding, like one of the things, like there's funding mechanisms I can get because I sit in the US and then I can subcontract, right? But it's easier for me to do that than go directly, right? There's funding mechanisms that can flow, there's training that can flow, but the extractive nature is really problematic.
Yeah, I mean, the extractive nature is a structural problem that I believe, in the words of Cecilia, is part of the system that we need to be able to sort of like look at the structure, and it has to evolve. Barbara, I just want to, this is a question that I'm just imagining from what I'm hearing here. Is it possible to say that there are kind of some skills, now aside from trying to shift the narrative and the structure of how both Western and South and LMIC partnerships exist, as well as how those research and government partnerships exist, it feels like there's certain skills that we need to start sort of like thinking and integrating in our mindset and our work. Do you have a sense of like what those would look like?
I mean, it's a big question, but I think there may be things that we've always said, but we sometimes forget. I mean, I have so I just want to hark back to the Monday morning plenary. I don't know if any of you noticed, Kate Raworth made a great statement at a certain moment. She said, we're all developing countries now. And I think that's part of what's at the heart, the nub, the heart of this problem of the disproportion of resource and power and access to knowledge and this sort of extractive processes. I think, I really think we have to all think about water and sanitation and hygiene as a project that we're all engaged in all over the world. And I would like to see more researchers who do work on that topic rather than I work on that topic specifically in low-income countries. It's kind of like it's all part of the same problem. So, I mean, Lisa just touched on the fact that I'm on the National Engineering Policy Council in the UK, and I'm supposed to be advising the government and the opposition on what are we going to do about our completely failing sewerage network in the UK. Spoiler, I don't know the answer. But the point is, it's great that actually the group of people who are being asked that question are very diverse, and we've got people from Brazilian utilities in that committee talking about what we're trying to do. It's pretty amazing. So that's one thing. The second thing, I think, is about humility and learning. I do find it enormously frustrating. I'm probably a bit old. Probably I'm nearly at the end of when I should sit on a panel like this, because, the number of times you go into a session and someone says, oh, did you know that excreta-related diseases can be both waterborne and water-washed? And you're like, oh. So I think that thing about, invest, read, learn with a bit of humility, and I think we all need to keep doing that. My professor used to tell me, if you write a paper, you should read 50 papers. That sounds hard. So that brings me to my third thing, which I think you're talking about, which is about translation. It's very important that we translate research for policy. I think it's very important that we communicate research amongst ourselves more effectively and more efficiently, and speaking the same language, or at least interpreting and kind of navigating through the jargon better than we do. And my final point goes back to this, we're all developing countries now. I think also at the heart of that sort of imbalance of power is a fundamental misunderstanding that the world has changed in another way that we haven't touched on. The capacity in African universities does not look anything like it looked in 1980. And I think, the kind of systems that we use to partner and engage are not catching up with the reality. And I think that's a systems change that donors need to really engage with, I think national governments. And I think talking about speaking truth to power, I think that's something that donors can do. I mean, if the government of Ghana is not investing in research, that's terrible. And I would come and stand beside you and make the case for that any day of the week, because I think if we can see ourselves as equally in the fight together, we will also start to be able to push for these things. And that's a way of overcoming, these fundamentally colonialist attitudes. If we see ourselves as all being on the same front line, we may be moved towards this position where we can try and solve these problems collaboratively, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Lisa, I'm coming to you last. You're listening to all these sort of shifting conversations and needs. How is FCDO and perhaps other development partners like yourself, how are you evolving to sort of be more supportive of this evolving landscape?
Yeah, thanks. It's always difficult to go last, right? Especially after that, but thank you. Listen, we are, I think, evolving as well and trying to change our mindset and the way we do things. So it sort of translates into we're supporting WASH systems strengthening, right? But behind that, there are other elements. There's elements of patient development. There's elements of partnership. There's elements of dialogue and kind of bringing people together to collaborate, to exchange that knowledge, to discuss and to find what the right solutions are or what possible solutions are together. So we were developing this new program called WASH Systems for Health. In developing this program, the first thing that we did is go out to countries and speak with our government counterparts, understand where the appetite for reform is, where the priority for reform is, and really kind of get behind that leadership. What we also did is try to understand how we, as an actor in the system, can support and what that support looks like. And so I'm not going to dwell on it for very long, but I think one important thing is that we're trying to embed this idea that, and it's not new, is that we are working together. We need to capture what we're doing, whether it's achieving change, and we need to learn and discuss whether we're on the right track or not. And that's, in jargon called adaptive programming. It's not new, but I think it's about changing, again, our mindsets about how we do things. And evidence behind that is that, yes, it's not always the RCT that's going to give you the solution. During COVID, we funded the Hygiene Behavior Change Coalition. We actually co-funded the Hygiene Hub, which was incredibly useful. It brought back what we knew of the evidence, the health-based evidence, but it also captured those case studies. It captured what was happening at the local level, what people were actually putting in place locally to ensure that people were washing their hands, what the norms, addressing the norms and kind of the elements that needed to change at that level. And that was then captured, brought onto a platform that was open and available to all, so talking about what's available and free to use. In fact, initially, most of the queries came from national governments in lower middle income countries who were asking, what is the evidence, what is it that we can put in place rapidly? And when I was in Nepal, it was really kind of, it really stuck with me, with one government official saying to me, we were trying to manage cross-border movements, and that was our absolute priority in order to stem the spread of the disease. So for partners to come in with those behavior change communication methods and kind of the funds that go with it was incredibly helpful, because it allowed to kind of fill that gap. But that was a partnership. Do you know what I mean? It was like we were filling a gap that it was, we were all struggling with at the time. So I guess my points are just that that partnership, that learning partnership is very important, and to create the platforms for that to happen are essential, and sanitation water for all being one of them. And we definitely don't want to duplicate and have lots of different platforms, and need to think about where those right platforms are as well, and how we use them better.
Thank you very much. Once again, put your hands together for this panel. Before we give them a chance to be able to give their wrapping statements, we want to open up the floor. There is, I can't see the whole of it. Can maybe somebody read?
Yeah. That's fine. We can weigh in a little bit. And
okay,
you guys
great.
You're doing a great job staying ahead of the online questions, because I think you've done a lot to already answer a lot of what's out there. But some of them revolve around political will at different levels. One is this question of system strengthening at the federal level. What does that look like, and how do you actually do that with national governments? And the other is, and I think this is more of a reflection back to some of the initial data that Clarissa put up there, which was, are we really losing this political game? And are we not building the political will at the levels that we need to, and whether or not these conferences are really relevant to building political will, or are there other mechanisms we should be thinking about?
Great. I mean, those are two questions already. I'm wondering whether we have any question from the audience, or should we focus on these two? Okay, great. Please go ahead.
Okay. Is this working? Yeah. Okay. Eric, you brought up the 1977 UN report, and in that report, there were 300 million people in Africa that needed water, and now there are 400 million. So I think everything we've done hasn't been good enough. I submitted a action agenda to the UN, and I realize y'all have looked at it, or may have looked at it, but the people that have done it, we get no feedback. I don't know what I need to adjust, what additional information I need to give, but in my agenda, it starts with a game changer, and I think I'm the only one in there that starts out with a game changer, and I show mathematically and I can show you with physics that it will work. It's a good plan, but if there's a problem with it, someone ought to let the people that submit the game changers what they need to do. And I haven't heard a word out of the UN or anyone. So it would be a good thing to do. I'm in a silo. You're in a silo. Let's get together, okay? And that's for Cecilia would be a good person to answer that.
Well, I'm not sure we have somebody who can specifically speak to that in this panel, unless somebody regarding the process of the UN water commitments. His question, and if I can paraphrase it from how I got it, is that these commitments were put in, but there's no mechanism for feedback to know
right.
Exactly.
That's correct. There's no, and I'm out in the public. I'm all over the internet. And
do you represent a government?
No, I don't. But I have written to UNICEF. Never heard back from them either. So that's...
Well, I don't know whether that's how you want. Maybe before we can get to that, can we get one more question so that we can
Sure.
respond? The gentleman over there before we come to the gentleman over here, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. It was a great discussion. This is Mahabub from ICT DRB, Bangladesh. I want to take few moments. Like in 2022, I had the opportunity to visit Seattle, and Ian William is also here. So he was also in the team when we were visiting the sewer system that was archived in Seattle. So you think about, even many 100 years back, they thought about the sewer system. So where is the problem? Still, we are talking about different sanitation options in different places. Second thing is that we have policies, we have respect to all the speakers here. We have policies, we know the agenda, we have the commitments, we might have the money in different places. So where really is the problem? You know that? One example I want to give you. We established a wastewater treatment plant, invested $1 billion there. But we don't have any network, and we don't know in the next 10 years it will be connected. So where is the problem? Maybe we have the problem with the visionary leader who need to change, not really changing the policy, always make things change. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Gentleman over there, the last question.
Yeah.
And
Thank you very much. I'm David from Nigeria, and thank you for all of the presentations that have been made. And I have a question here because this bothers my mind. Looking at even the theme for this, science, policy, and practice, and I've seen it connect with science and also leading to policy, but the practice has been a challenge. Even looking at it from the developing countries, the interventions that have been made so far in terms of funding coming to the developing countries, but still there are still gaps. In terms
sorry,
of
I missed the last point. What?
I said that there have been interventions,
yes,
so far all the years, but there are still gaps. Looking at the practice, at the short term, the long term, and even the mid-term, as the case may be, then the governments of nations also have questions to answer. And my worry is this: how many government officials of our respective nations are here, even to listen, to know what the issues are? Because trying to intervene even in the problem of a nation and the government's priority is different. In one of the lectures yesterday, I asked a question when it was presented to say government is still servicing debt, and most of the funds that they have not even been directed to addressing the needs of the local people. So it will still be a challenge if we told this line, not really connecting the policy that has been set actually to meeting the needs of the people that funds are being geared even to help. So it's a big deal that we need to really, and I would expect or appreciate members of the panel to be able to speak to it. How can we navigate to see that government truly create that channel to let the funds flow to where it is actually needed to meeting the needs of the local people and in the community? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, do we have quite a number? Unfortunately, I think because of time, we only have like 8 minutes to go, and time is already fast spent. I would want to limit the questions to what we have right now so that we are able to finish on time, otherwise we'll be kicked out of this place. I don't know what anybody wants to be able to respond to any of the questions that have come through here. Perhaps the very first direct question is UNICEF managing UNICEF is not responding to the gentleman about the UN water commitments.
We have no particular responsibility, no, but as a UN agency, of course, we are part of the whole setup. So just to say on the commitments on the UN conference itself, the UN conference, I think, was a success. It brought about a lot of people, a lot of engagement by member states. Then the piece where governments and everybody was supposed to bring in their transformative commitments for action wasn't necessarily the most, visible process. And I suppose what's going on in New York does not necessarily replicate on what's going on at country level. So if there had been maybe more of engagement at country level, rallying with governments and local stakeholders say, here is your opportunity to bring your message, which is smart, something you want to do, and eventually you can even get support to implement it. Could have shifted. So I mean, the way it's done, I think it's something which the UN system needs to look at a little bit. Now it's only voluntary, no formal follow-up process. Now it's going to happen with the new water conferences, but when people did the commitments, it was not clear. But just to say then, on that there are other interesting processes rallying political commitments, like the Heads of States Initiative under the SWA, UNICEF, the Dutch government, for instance, are bringing together commitments from heads of states. And that's where we see a lot of support, a lot of dialogue with governments, then you see engagement. And we have the Africa Investment Program, Heads of State Program, again, a lot of engagement. Government wants to show, they want to commit, they have their plans. So we can get the highest level of engagement in WASH. Things are moving, but it takes a lot of time and effort, specific capacity needed.
Thank you very much. Just quickly, are we losing this political game in this sector? Just who wants to respond to that? Are we losing this political game? In 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll have a go in 30 seconds. We've always been losing the political game because very little, well, water is a little bit political and sexy. Sanitation is totally not. My mum told me years ago not to get into sanitation because you can't talk about it after dinner. Turns out you can't talk about it in cabinet office. Turns out you can't talk about it pretty much anywhere, and at least here. It's a safe space, guys. But so that brings me to, I think David and Mahbub were both touching on the same question. The things we get done are the highly visible things. Yes, we build the big wastewater treatment plant. No, we don't connect people to the households. And I think one of the things we have to do is to, I would say, be a bit less nice about it. There is a lot of evidence of the public benefits, you know, the benefits to society of all of these things we're talking about. We need to, again, think, I mean, if I'm thinking about Ghana, if I'm in the UK, my job is to speak truth to power. If I want to support Ghana, my job is to provide the ammunition and the support and the counselling service and the shoulder to cry on when it's very difficult for Kwabena to speak truth to power. But it's a political fight, and we need to be in that fight, working hard. That is part of our job, and we have to do that work. It's hard work. It's too easy for politicians to do the kind of easy stuff and not do the hard stuff.
Yeah. Yes, please, just go ahead, 30 seconds.
Yeah. One of the things from cholera is water and WASH has absolutely lost the political game to vaccines. Vaccines are sexier, they're a single answer, vaccinate, be done. Except now the vaccines aren't available, so they're coming back to WASH. And I think this comes back to Barbara's point of we don't play the political game correctly, we're not sexy. WASH is about step by step, get that treatment plant in, get that working, get that done, and when WASH works, we don't notice it. Yep. And that is the key problem, and we have to play this political game better because we lose to anything else that's more sexy and more silver bullet.
Thank you very much. So just because we have 3 minutes to go, and unfortunately I have to skip some of the questions that came through here, I just want to give a chance for the panelists to give a 30-second closing remarks, starting with Kwabena.
Okay, 30 seconds. My dear friend wanted to know how we can get governments to release money for the sector. And you did indicate that they are struggling to service debt. So they look at debt first before looking at WASH. And that is part of the political economy, and it is an issue for us to crack. So my concluding remarks, I think the commitments really confirm the state of the sector, and it's a call to action, so we should all play the roles that we are best placed to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Cecilia.
Yes, thank you. So just to end where we started, and it's really about having strong national systems in place to deliver sustainable and climate resilient services. This is an extremely important shift that we are taking, and we're doing it as a movement. But we need to know that we do the right things. So we need more evidence that is robust and yet practical to act. And this, to me, is really important because we need to act now. We have no time to waste. And we need to ensure that research and evidence is produced in an accessible way to decision makers. Many of you have said it, timely, understandable, so the right policies are taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Danielle?
I'm really struck by this whole it's hard to know what the successes are, and I want to pull out 2 successes that have been made. The JMP is an astounding set of data where research is able to be done, and UNICEF, World Health, Rick, Tom, everyone deserves a ton of credit for that, incorporating local data. The second one is the Hygiene Hub. You didn't speak enough. That was an amazing amount of donors coming together, FCDO with others, led by LSHTM, pulling in a host of other researchers. I was very tangential, if that. And the answers that came through, taking research, putting it up on the web. I mean, when Lauren talks about the numbers of that, they had 20 to 30 people working on it, answering local governments in 7 minutes with research digestible, informing policy, and it was spun up in weeks. That's what we need to do moving forward in this new world.
Thank you. Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my final words are just, I think what's really powerful is having the voice of people on those massive platforms like at SWA, like at the UN Water Conference, and capturing those local voices, capturing the voices of women, capturing the voices of those people who don't yet have access or have had access and don't have it anymore. I think those are really important, and those are powerful, and we need to make sure that we capture those and that they are present in those fora. And of course, can't go away without saying that the evidence is really key. When we're talking to ministers and decision makers, ultimately they want to know where to invest most effectively in order to achieve the change. And in a world of competing resources, we have to be really good at saying that, and we have to be saying that with the understanding of what the broader political economy is, what the broader kind of issues are, but also what other sectors are saying and how we kind of build on efficiencies across health, across education, and across other sectors. Thanks.
Excellent. And lastly, Barbara?
I agree with all of that. So I'm going to use my 30 seconds to plug tomorrow's plenary, because I think, it is really important that we also understand the power structures within which we work. And tomorrow we have a whole plenary where we're going to be even a bit more open and honest than we've been here about the reality of those. And a lot of the voices on that panel are young people who see the world differently from with all due respect to us old folk. So, sorry to lump us all together. So I would really just encourage you to come to tomorrow's plenary, but bring this conversation to tomorrow's plenary.
And with those words, I just want to say thank you so much for you panelists for coming. Please put your hands together once again to them. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was perfect. Yeah.
Wait, should we
Yeah, you can exit on the stage there. All right, hang on. I know it's lunchtime, but calm down. Let me make a few announcements. We have a couple of dining areas, actually a few. One is obviously Trillium, and you can get in the lineup there. If you want to join one of the lunch sessions, please go to the lunch lineup, and then go to the rooms. There are drinks and desserts in those locations. And today, the young professionals are talking about risk communication. So please go to Magnolia Lounge if you're interested in talking about risk communication. And go to the side events, the verbals, and join us again for posters. I also want to talk about the plenaries coming up. Like Barbara mentioned, we have a plenary tomorrow on dismantling unhelpful power dynamics in WASH. You all are going to lunch, I see. Join us on Friday for the interview with Sarosh Jha. Tonight, here's the announcement. If you're an introvert and you've just about had enough with all these land mammals around you, we can recommend a great yoga studio for a drop-in session. But if you want to join us for dinner, we will have ice cream and the Unsustainables band and the Zim Zoom photo booth and some travel awards, that sort of thing. And so join us at 6 for dinner. And tomorrow, we will start opening up the wintergreen room for you to store your luggage in before you head to the airport. So check out of your hotel rooms, and you can bring your luggage here to the wintergreen room and then pick it up before you go. I think it speaks for itself. My recommendation is to check it out. Don't make any sudden movements or direct eye contact, but go and It's going to be at the picnic tables in the north side of the Friday Center, and look for the chicken. I don't think you'll have to look. I think it'll be there. So check it out. And again, thanks to our sponsors. This conference wouldn't be possible without you. And everybody's like, yeah, we know. Let's eat. So have a great Wednesday, and we'll see you tonight.